קודשו, הודיע אדוני ישועתו, לעיני הגויים גילה צדקתו, זכר חסדו ואמונתו לבית ישראל.
We'll continue that tomorrow night. That's Keep Alive. Those guys are rocking. I love those guys. That's Keep Alive. We're working our way through the whole Kabbalat Shabbat service in these opening songs. A Guten Erev Shabbos, everybody. Shabbos is coming tonight. We are so excited. We're in the 9 days. We want to lessen our joy a little bit as we're headed toward the 9th of Av. But now we've got Shabbos coming in, so we're definitely going to get into that Shabbos frame of mind. How are you doing, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. All right, who's with us in the house as we're getting ready for Shabbos? James Roth says Shabbat Shalom. Yehudit Sobel says Shalom from Florence, South Carolina. Stephen Giger says Shalom from Rome, Maine. Christo Cheney says Good Shabbos from Lubbock, Texas. Yehudit Sobel says, wishing you and Nina and all the rest and everybody a restful and rejuvenating Shabbos. Bill Eldridge says a blessed Shabbos from Berkeley. Joan Grondel Rich says she's with us from Marion, Ohio. Christine Van Pickeren says good Shabbos from the Netherlands. Un halofaluk. Good to see you. Jeffrey King says shalom from Hollywood, Florida. Gil Alkadesh says Shabbat Shalom. Paul Papuzinski from Louisiana / Florida. You on the border? That would be a big border. Lorraine Schoenfeld says no veggies. Oh my gosh, this is going to be a fun day today. We're going to get some advice from Rav Chisda. It's going to blow your mind. Gisette Elias says shalom from Colorado in the Rocky Mountains. Sharon Frant Brooks says hey from Lebanon, New Jersey. Heidi Carlson says hi. Lindsay Adams says a good Erev Shabbos from Cincinnati. Owen Mayer is with us saying hi from New York. Miriam Jacobs says Shabbat Shalom from Hayden, Colorado. Margaret Saida is talking to Christine Van Peckeren. What's it like in your country? David Ben Ellie is with us from Lake Mary, Florida, saying Shabbat Shalom. Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago. Adrian Smith says good Shabbos from Columbia Falls, Montana. Nazmul Hassan says, hello, I am from Bangladesh. Nazmul, it's great to have you with us. Fantastic. And Margaret Saida says, shalom from Tanzania. And Yehuda Kimani says, Shabbat Shalom from Kenya. Wow, great to have you with us. Hinda Ader says, a very gloomy and cloudy Brooklyn, New York is in the house. Neil is with us. Neil is with us from Virginia saying, "Good Shabbos, I have some poor college boys who should be reading this daf today." Absolutely. Rick Weiss says shalom from Tennessee. Neil's with us from Virginia. Lynn is with us from North Texas. And Deborah Hazelwood says shalom. Hello, everybody. There is a lot of material to cover in today's daf, so let's get right into it. It's going to be some wonderful advice from Rav Chisda about how to handle things when you're poor and when you're rich. Let's get into it. Okay, we're on Shabbos, we're at page 140, Daf Kuf Mem. We're in chapter 20, and we're going to finish up our discussion, God willing, of Mishna number 2, complete Mishna number 3, where there's some amazing teachings, and we're going to open our discussion of Mishna number 4. Let's get right into it. Mishna number 2, this whole chapter is basically some almost like miscellaneous teachings that are related to food preparation. They just come from different places, and we're sort of gradually building our understanding of what's going to be permitted and what's not. We know we can't cook. We know that we're not going to light a flame on Shabbos. We're not going to cook food on Shabbos. But there's some things that when we do food preparation, are we just mixing oil and vinegar for our salad? That would seem to be okay. But if we're going to make like salad dressing and add a whole bunch of things and make a jar of it and really shake it up vigorously, and somehow like that's going to be our salad dressing for the rest of the week, so that's not going to be okay, because we're not going to prepare a food, first of all, for use beyond Shabbos, and we're not going to do something that's complicated, even though it doesn't involve cooking. So we're sort of working our way into the underlying philosophy of this, but there's going to be a bunch of different teachings to help us along and sort of getting at that underlying theory of what's going on. All right, so this Mishnah number 2, it includes these ideas that we can run clear wine through a strainer on Shabbos, but not murky wine, right? So if the wine is already pretty clear, it might get just a little bit more refined by running through this strainer, which was already hung before Shabbos. As we know, we can't hang that strainer on Shabbos. That's that cloth strainer that we talked about a couple days ago. So if it was murky wine, then we would be separating the edible, drinkable wine from that sediment that we don't want. But if the wine was already pretty clear, then whatever is going to be left in the strainer when we sort of further refine it, it was edible anyway, so we're not separating edible from inedible. That's a principle that we understand. We may make this substance called, what was it called? Amtulin, anumlin. It's one of those unfamiliar words. It was even unfamiliar to them. Anumlin. We may make anumlin, which seems to be a little bit like, no, I don't want to say that. It's some kind of a mixture of wine and honey. It's one of these things that they used to drink in the ancient world. And we may mix wine and honey. That seems to be okay. But of course, there's going to be some limitations. And we can separate an egg white from its yolk. That's not its purpose, right? I mean, we're not going to cook the egg. So this is taking a raw egg. And what are we really doing with it? We're going to mix it in with the mustard. So we're going to have a big argument about mustard. Apparently, mustard in the ancient world, you didn't just get a jar from the supermarket, open the jar, and got your mustard that you can spread. You had to make your own mustard. And one of the basic principles about making mustard in the ancient world is that the process of taking the mustard seed and kneading it like dough, so that was real work. And so that's just like making the challah for Shabbos, right? You need to knead the dough. Of course, you would never do that on Shabbos. You wouldn't even bake the challah on Shabbos. But kneading the mustard seed is sort of like kneading the dough. That kind of work you needed to do before Shabbos. But having done that work, so now this kneaded mustard seed, kneaded, right? K-N-E-A-D-E-D. That already kneaded mustard seed that's sitting in the strainer, well, now we can add an egg to it, even though the effect of adding the egg to it is that part of the egg will, I guess, drip through, and part of the egg will stay in the strainer with the mustard seed. And so we will be separating the egg from the yolk, which is a little bit like separating, selecting. I mean, it's still edible, and that's why it's going to be permitted if we were separating the edible from the inedible, it wouldn't be. But now, in terms of this mustard preparation, now we're going to get into it. The sages go nuts when it comes to mustard. So, Rav said, if the mustard was kneaded like dough on Friday, so that was done on Friday before Shabbos, then on Shabbos, we may dissolve that, already sort of mushed, let's call it mushed instead of kneaded. So that mushed mustard seed, we can dissolve in wine or water on Shabbos using a vessel, but not with our hand, right? So it says, Rav, we can do that with a vessel, but not with our hands. And what he's getting at is, this is the sort of thing it feels a little bit not Shabbostic, right? It feels a little bit like, it's kind of a somewhat complicated, heavy-handed preparation. So we want to make sure that we're distinguishing the way we do it during the week from the way we do it on Shabbos. So according to Rav, it seems like during the week we do it by hand. So on Shabbos, we're going to do it with vessels and not by hand. Shmuel says to Rav, what the heck are you talking about? During the week, do we do this by hand? Only if we're mixing a large amount of coarse mixture of the mustard because we're going to feed it to the donkey. It's donkey food. But when we're talking about a nice preparation of good quality mustard during the week, of course we use vessels. So that's the way we do it during the week. Therefore, on Shabbos, we're going to do it by hand, so we're doing it in that atypical manner. Rabbi Elazar says, what are you guys talking about? Not by hand, not by vessel. We don't mix the mustard mush with wine or water on Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan says, what are you talking about? Of course we can do it, and then we could do it either with a vessel or with hand, because either way, it's not true food preparation. We're just adding some liquid to it to make it more palatable to us. But both the mustard mush was prepared for Shabbos, the wine was prepared for Shabbos, and mixing a little bit so that I can eat it right now, that's fine, that's permitted. Abaye and Rava both say Rabbi Yochanan is wrong. That is way too lenient of an opinion. And in fact, Rabbi Yochanan changed his mind. Rabbi Yochanan said, you know what? Rabbi Elazar was right. We shouldn't do it at all. It's too similar to like the real work of food preparation. We shouldn't do it on Shabbos. But Rabbi Elazar also changed his mind. He came around to the position of Shmuel. So we can do it on Shabbos, but only by hand. That's the atypical manner. Zera, Rabbi Zera's wife, Rav Zera, she made it for Zera's students. So Zera was the head of the academy in his region, and his student was Rav Chia bar Ashi, who would become a great sage himself, but this is when he was younger, and he was Zera's student, and he was eating Shabbos lunch, let's say, over by Zera's house, by the head of the academy, by his Rav's house. And his wife made the mustard the same way she made it for Zera, and she put it in front of Rav Chia bar Ashi, and he wouldn't eat it. And she said, you won't eat it? Your rabbi eats it. What do you mean you won't eat it? Well, I'm sorry, that's how I hold. He wouldn't eat it. And so finally, on this back and forth, that even the sages couldn't figure out this, sort of borderline case of preparing the mustard on Shabbos, what's going to be the rule? Everybody has different rules. Everybody holds a different way. The sages can't agree. What are the people going to do? And so Mar Zutra finally had the last word, and this is the halacha. Mar Zutra, when we're talking about somebody who has the title Mar, M-A-R, we're talking about the exilarch, right? So this is in the Babylonian Jewish community, and the head of that Jewish community is the exilarch, right? The patriarch would have been the head of the community in Israel. Here he's really called the Nasi in Israel. But in the exile community, in the diaspora community, the chief rabbi in Babylonia is called the exilarch, okay? And so Mar Zutra said, here's the final word, Mar Zutra said, the halacha is not in accordance with any of these statements. Rather, it is in accordance with this one. As it is stated, mustard that was kneaded on Erev Shabbos, so it was mushed up on Erev Shabbos, on the following day, he may dissolve it either by hand or with a vessel, and he may place honey in it. And when he dissolves it, he may not beat it forcefully as would a craftsman, but he may mix it gently. So Mar Zutra sort of investigated this whole thing and why were people holding one way and the other and one way and the other. And he saw that what was really going on is, if you're just mixing two foods together so that you can eat it, okay, that's fine. But this vigorous mixing, that was the problem, because that really feels like doing work and preparing something sort of that almost causes a chemical change because of the vigorous mixing. It's a little bit too much, right? It's a little bit too much. You know where this comes up? Some people like to make guacamole for their Shabbos dinner. If you're making guacamole, you got to think about that. You really got to think about that, right? Maybe you should have made it before Shabbos began. If you're just kind of mixing the avocado and a few other ingredients, any one of which you might have eaten by itself, so it seems okay. But if you get really into it and it's like a true food preparation, very much akin to cooking, even though it's not with heat, so maybe you might want to back off and get that done before Shabbos began. Okay. Apropos of mixing wine and honey, which was also part of this Mishna, we get a statement of Rav Yosef, which is pretty colorful. Rav Yosef said, on one occasion, I followed Mar Ukva, so not Mar Zutra, but Mar Ukva, so it's another generation. I followed Mar Ukva into a bathhouse. And when I exited, right, so when you took a hot bath back then, really only the very rich people could take a bath in their own home. The normal person would go to a bathhouse so that he could take a hot bath. And when I exited, he came and gave me 1 cup of his wine to drink. And I felt its chill from the hairs on my head down to the toenails on my feet. And if he had given me another cup to drink, and if I would have survived it, I would have feared a reduction of my merit in the world to come. And the Gemara asks, didn't Mar Ukva drink this wine every day? How was he not harmed? And the Gemara answers, Mar Ukva was different as he grew accustomed to it. There's a lot going on there. But this idea, first of all, there's a great idea here that, what's good for one person may not be good for another. Mar Ukva, he's the head of the community. He's very, very rich. He's used to eating these kinds of very fine foods. He develops a tolerance to whatever its intoxicating effect may be. Rav Yosef was a much more humble person, and for him, this drink was way too strong. Eventually, in Tractate Megillah, we'll encounter this very famous story between Rabbah and Rav Zera, which has to do with some very strong intoxication around Purim and some spirit and a very mystical journey that they both take, which was possible for Rabbah, but not advisable for Rav Zera. And he told him that that's not for me. Good for you. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but not for me. And we should recognize that there's differences between us and people have different tolerances, etc. Also, this idea that Rav Yosef was afraid that his portion in the world to come would somehow be reduced, that his merit would be reduced. What does he mean by that? So one idea here is that when a miracle is performed for us because we were in danger, right? And it's because, okay, I'm talking in his voice. I'm a sage, I'm teaching a lot, I'm doing a lot of good in the world, I'm bringing a lot of Torah to my students and to the world, so I've acquired a certain amount of merit. But if I go and endanger myself and, heaven has to interfere and save my life, it's like I've used up a portion of my merit that really ought to stand me in good. I'm really saving that merit for when I get into the next world. And when we understand, this is not for today because there's so much else to cover today, but this idea of one's portion in the world to come, it comes up often in the Talmud, the way the sages describe their portion in the next world. And it's good to understand that the Jewish understanding, the Talmudic understanding of the afterlife, it's not binary, okay? It's not, either I go to a good place or I go to a bad place. In fact, in the bad place, we mostly think of that as a temporary place, and then you go on to the good place. So you might think, well, I'm just going up there anyway. What am I going to worry about? But it's not like that at all. There's infinite levels, many different levels where you could end up. So it's just not to say that all you got to think about is getting to the good place and not the bad place. You're really trying to set yourself up for that next life, that next greater, bigger, eternal stage of one's journey, of the journey of the soul. So a better way to look at it, the Jewish view of the afterlife, is that when we leave this world, when we transition out of this world, we're just getting started, right? And then we're going on a major expedition. And depending on how we set ourselves up in this world is going to be our starting point when we get into the next world. And when you start thinking of it that way, a lot of things really do start to make sense. The more that you learn and acquire wisdom and acquire Torah and acquire, higher learning, that's something you can take with you. Material possessions are meaningless over there. But when you continue your spiritual journey, the more that you've thought about growing in wisdom, growing in kindness, growing in goodness, growing in Torah, those things you can take with you, and then you could start from that place when you get to the next world. If you're not even thinking about, growing as a soul, or God forbid, you're one of these people who says, yeah, the afterlife, it's just nonsense, it's superstition, it's all made up. In Tractate Sanhedrin, it talks about such a person who denies that there is a world to come, so that person loses their portion in the world to come. And it kind of makes sense. It's not so much a punishment as a natural consequence. If you're not sort of preparing your soul for that next part of the journey, well, your soul energy sort of gets recycled back into, the source of souls, into Hashem, into God. But you hanging on to your identity and continuing in a place that is just so much more, fluid and beautiful and old and vast, it's almost like you just scatter when you get there and you don't continue in that world. It's a much bigger discussion and for another day. But suffice it to say that every bit of wisdom and love and kindness and soulfulness that we acquire in this world accrues to our benefit in the next world. Let's continue. Now we get into Mishnah number 3. Mishnah number 3 starts by making a distinction in terms of the plant asafoetida. I just like saying that, asafoetida. So one may not soak asafoetida in lukewarm water. And by the way, I'm sure there's questions and comments. I'll be taking them at the end. Nina will feed them to me. One may not soak asafoetida in lukewarm water to prepare a medicinal drink from it. However, one may place it into vinegar like a standard spice. So we've seen this distinction before. Something, if your life is not in danger, and if you're not really sick to the point that you couldn't enjoy Shabbos, so we don't treat that kind of, we don't take medicine for minor ailments on Shabbos. That's an ancient decree that we still honor. And originally it was because pretty much all medicines required grinding, and grinding was definitely prohibited on Shabbos. Obviously, if a life is in danger, or if somebody's really, really ill and in pain, then we would override Shabbos, desecrate Shabbos in order to take care of that person. But for minor ailments, we don't medicate. So asafoetida seems to be, generally taken for a minor ailment. So we don't do that on Shabbos. However, it's also mixed with vinegar and used as a spice, and that's something that people eat anyway. So if it happens to help you to take it, for your minor ailment, but you're eating it in a way that it's normally eaten, so much the better. It's the same way that chicken soup might help a person, but it's food anyway, so you don't have to worry about that you're taking medicine. That's something we can do on Shabbos. The Mishnah number 3 also says that we may not sift straw in a sieve, and and it talks about giving straw to animals, right? And like if straw hadn't had its chaff removed already, So that's like winnowing, and we don't do that on Shabbos. But if you pick it up in such a way that the chaff falls off the hay, off the straw, as you're giving it to the animal, you're just giving the food to the animal, so that's okay. It's just like one of those things that incidentally happens. The same way that asafoetida, you're eating it because you're eating it in the way that people normally eat it, and if it happens to heal you, so much the better. So in the discussion in the Gemaras of this particular Mishna, we also learned, Rav Chisda said, that if you have a bundle of vegetables and it's suitable for animal food, it is permitted to move it on Shabbos, but if not, it's prohibited to move it. So we're talking about a very big bundle of vegetables, and that's not really prepared for Shabbos use, right? That's more like when you bring big, you have grocery bags that you brought in before Shabbos. It's not even grocery bags because it's really, these big bundles of vegetables, it's for animals. It's just not prepared for normal eating, so we wouldn't want to move the bundle. Yeah, of course you could take vegetables off the bundle for you to eat, but big bundles of vegetables, it's just no one's going to eat that. So as a bundle, it becomes muktzah. We don't move it. However, if you need it to feed your animals, then certainly you can move the bundle of vegetables. And now that we're talking about bundles of vegetables, we are going to get a list of advice, sayings, bits of advice from Rav Chisda. Once he gets started, we're going to bring them all down. And he's mostly going to be he's somebody who was poor at one point in his life, and he was wealthy at another point in his life. And now he's going to give advice to the young yeshiva students. In other words, young people who are at a stage in their life where they're poor, maybe even broke, right? I can identify with this, right? Like when you're in college and you're eating ramen every night, you have a different diet than when you're an adult and you can eat other kinds of foods, right? So, on the topic of the bundle of vegetables, the Gemara cites additional advice on similar issues that Rav Chisda said to poor scholars experiencing difficulty earning a livelihood. A student of a Torah academy who buys vegetables should buy long vegetables. Because a bundle is a bundle, and they have a standard thickness at a standard price, but the addition of length comes at its own for free, right? So in other words, it seems like they charge the same price for a bundle of short cucumbers as for a bundle of long cucumbers. So get the long cucumbers, you get a little extra food, it'll keep you going. And Rav Chisda further said, a student of a Torah academy who does not have much bread should not eat a vegetable because it whets the appetite. And Rav Chisda said, I neither ate a vegetable in my state of poverty, nor did I eat a vegetable in my state of wealth. In my poverty, I did not eat vegetables because they whet the appetite. They just make you hungry for more. And in my wealth, I did not eat a vegetable because I said, well, where a vegetable enters, let meat and fish enter instead. So this is, a little contradictory to what we would say these days is a healthy diet. But for Rav Chisda, in his experience, vegetables don't do that much for you. When you're poor, it just makes you hungry for more. And when you're rich, you can't eat that many things anyway. You might as well have meat and fish. Rav Chisda said, a student of a Torah academy who does not have much bread should not cut it into thin slices. Rather, he should eat what he has in one helping. Interesting. So according to Rav Chisda, instead of doling it out and just eating a little bit of the time so that you're never really having a satisfying meal, better just have one meal in the day and at least it feels like you ate a lot. And moreover, he says, Rav Chisda also says a student of the Torah Academy who does not have much bread should not break it for guests. What is the reason? As he will not do so in a generous manner. And Rav Chisda said, originally I would not break bread until I placed my hand in the entire dish to assure that I found there enough bread to meet my needs. So what he's saying is, don't put yourself in a position, right? If you can't afford to be generous, then don't put yourself in a position where it's going to be visible whether you're generous or not, right? If you can't yet host, So wait until you have more, you've acquired a little more, you've saved up some more, and you can host properly, right? But if you're going to put yourself in a position where you're the host and you're going to be stingy, you're not ready to host. That's what Rav Chisda is saying. And then Rav Chisda said, one who is able to eat barley bread and nevertheless eats wheat bread violates the prohibition against wanton destruction. So there's a prohibition that things which exist in this world, we should be careful with them. I think we actually learned that from Jacob when he's bringing his family back to the Holy Land and he's afraid of confronting Esau, his brother Esau, and he's sort of ferrying his stuff across the river during the night, and then he goes back one last trip because he left a small item, a small jar, and that's actually when he has that encounter with the angel, when Jacob wrestles with the angel. But we actually learn out from that episode that a person should not be careless with material goods, right? Especially when we're doing well and we're wealthy and we might just be tempted like, whatever, I'm not going to worry about it. No, a person should be careful. You never know. You never know. You might lose everything, God forbid, and you should be careful with the stuff in your life. And you should never be careless and allow things to be destroyed. People who've been poor and then become rich usually understand that pretty well. But their children who grow up in the lap of luxury can often be very wasteful. And so he's saying, really take this lesson to heart. And truthfully, if you could be satisfied with barley bread, which is a cheaper and coarser kind of bread, then why eat wheat bread? You don't need to eat the finer stuff. It's better to just eat what's necessary in this world. Don't go for the luxury items if you don't have to. But Rav Papa, who was pretty wealthy, answers him, well, one who is able to drink beer and nevertheless drinks wine. Oh, and I'm sorry. Okay, and he also said, and Rav Chisda also said, and if you're satisfied with beer, so have beer, don't drink wine, which is also more expensive. But Rav Papa answers him, and this is not correct, as the prohibition against destruction of one's body takes precedence over the prohibition of destroying things. In other words, according to Rav Papa, if indeed it is healthier for me to eat wheat bread over barley bread or to drink wine over beer, well, then I should have the finer thing. Do not skimp in matters of the body. When it comes to taking care of one's health, one should put himself out for it. And that is an important teaching. And I actually learned this from my friend Nat Rubin, and I forget where he heard it, but it's an important teaching, right? That you do. It's actually a Torah commandment that you take care of your health. Why? It's not written anywhere, but the understanding of why we have to take care of our bodies is because if we don't take care of ourselves, we will lose years of our life. And those years that we lost because we didn't take care of our health, think of all the mitzvahs that we will not perform, the Shabbats that we won't honor, the charity that we won't give, the kindnesses that we won't perform because we allowed ourselves to be taken from this world prematurely because we didn't take care of our health. We do need to take care of our health. That's the one I wanted to read there. And finally, Rav Chisda says, a student of a Torah academy, one who is young and broke, should not sit on a new mat as its dampness ruins his garments. Now, he also said in the previous teaching that even though you're being really cheap and you're going to be very smart and not spend too much money on food and get bigger bundles of vegetables for the same price as smaller bundles, etc., you should be cheap as much as you can. You should be smart, is what he's saying. You should be smart in how you spend your meager resources. However, it is worth it, even if you're very poor, to invest in having at least one fine shirt. In other words, at least one outfit of good clothes. Here I'm reminded of Shakespeare, Polonius advising Hamlet when he says, or advising his son Laertes, the clothes oft proclaim the man. It is worth it to have good clothes. Obviously not super expensive, crazy, rich, luxury good clothes, but you have to be able to be presentable, right? So it's worth investing to have, you don't have to have a lot of clothes, but have at least one good outfit, call it your Shabbos outfit, so that you'll be presentable wherever you go. And now that you have one good outfit and you have to take good care of it, he's saying don't sit on a new mat, because new mats that they used to sit on were often moist, and then they would damage that one good outfit that the person had. So he's really advocating that you have to have sort of an attitude of mindfulness to protect yourself, to protect your meager possessions, to get the most out of your money so that you can enjoy yourself in this world and not be too much brought down by the temporary poverty that you're in. He also gave advice to his daughters. Rav Chisda said to his daughters, be modest before your husbands. Do not overeat in front of them. Do not eat vegetables at night. He definitely had a problem with vegetables. Do not eat vegetables at night, as they cause bad breath. Do not eat dates at night, and do not drink beer at night, as these loosen up your insides and then you have to go to the bathroom. And do not relieve yourselves. Now, this is advice for husbands and wives. Do not relieve yourselves in front of each other, right? You should have, even though husband and wife shares the same living space, don't attend to your very private needs in front of each other. You should have a little bit of mystery between you, lest you take each other for granted. We had that same teaching from Rabbi Manis Friedman when he was here for an accidental Talmudist show. And he illustrated this, Rav Chisda illustrated this. He held a pearl in one hand and a clod of earth in the other. The pearl he showed to his children immediately, and the clod of earth he did not show them until they were so upset with their curiosity that they begged him, they screamed at him, show us, Papa, what's in your other hand. Now, the one he already showed them was a pearl of great, great value, right? So he's giving this lesson when he's older and wealthy. And what's in his other hand, it's just a clod of earth, but he won't show it to them. They said, Papa, show us, Papa, show us, Papa, show us. And he finally showed it to them, and it was just a pebble, right? It was just a clod of earth. But he demonstrated to them that what is mysterious, what is hidden, what is kept back is so much more valuable than what is openly revealed. And he was talking about modesty. The lesson was really for his daughters, right? Be modest in your dress. Letting it all hang out is not, it attracts the eye short term, but in the long term, having a little bit of an air of mystery is going to go a lot further. That was the advice of Rabbi Chisda. And now we'll come to your comments and questions. We're just going to open our discussion of Mishnah number 4, which says one may sweep hay from before an animal that is being fattened, and one may move hay to the sides for an animal that grazes on its own in the field. So here they're making a distinction. Imagine living, in a time that the temple is standing and in very much a kind of agricultural and shepherding society. So somebody that is planning to bring a sacrifice in the temple, they're not just going to say, okay, we're going up to Jerusalem. I'll take this one, grab an animal and go. You're going to plan that out for a long time. When you're going to give to God, you're going to give of your best. These days, when you're going to do some kind of volunteer work or you're going to do a good deed for people, you don't just do it haphazardly. You invest in that venture. If you get involved with a nonprofit, you invest in that venture. You give your time and you give of your best. So they would prepare the animal for quite a while. In other words, they would fatten it. Right, so we've talked about a few times. I think it was Rabbi Yehoshua who said, well, one of the first things we read in Tractate Shabbos that we may not adjust the wick. We may not even read by the Shabbos lamp. On Friday night, we may not read by the Shabbos lamp. Right, this flame. Why? It's a rabbinic decree, lest you come and, without thinking about it, adjust the wick or move the lamp, which will cause it to be extinguished prematurely, and then you're violating the prohibition on extinguishing a light. And he said, well, I get why we said that, because we want to protect people from coming to violate the Torah prohibition on extinguishing the light, but I'm a sage. I know the rule really well. I'm preparing a lecture to give my students tomorrow on Shabbos, and I need to study scripture so that I'm ready to do that mitzvah. So he was reading, and without thinking about it, he moved the light. And he said, how wise are the sages. Now I see that it's an important decree that we don't read by the light. I said that I wouldn't, and I did read by the light, and I did adjust the wick, and when the temple shall be rebuilt, I will bring a fatted calf, right? So this idea of not just bringing a calf, but a fatted calf, which means that over a course of time, you're going to make that calf fatter, right? By giving it higher quality food, not just more food, but higher quality food. It's just going to be a sacrifice. You're not going to eat it. It's a sin offering. I think the priest eats some of it and the rest is burnt up. So it's not for you to enjoy it, but it's for you to show God that you're giving your best, right? Now, speaking about these fatted calves, we're learning that you may sweep hay away from it so that it will eat the right kind of food. So we may sweep the hay aside, and there's going to be two limitations in the Gemara on this Mishna. I'm just mentioning it now because tomorrow we're going to start with a new Mishna. But the two limitations are when you sweep the hay away from in front of your fatted calf, two things are you're not going to do it in a trough, right? So a trough, it's normally used for feeding animals. Why can't you sweep hay to the side within the trough? Because there were troughs that were built out of wood and metal, and there were also troughs that were just like a ditch in the ground. And the ditch in the ground, you can't sweep hay to the side in it because you're going to come to fill in holes, which is a prohibited labor on Shabbos. And to protect you from filling in holes in an earthen trough, the rabbis also prohibited sweeping hay to the side in the wooden or metal trough. And secondly, you're not going to sweep hay away from the type of animal that drools. And there's a distinction here between donkeys and cows. I believe donkeys don't drool and cows do. What's the problem with sweeping it away from an animal that drools? Because once it's been eating and its drool falls on the hay, now you sweep it to the side, another animal won't eat it. You don't want your fatted calf to eat that, but it drooled on it and now no other animal will eat it. And so what you've done is taken something that is not useful for Shabbos because the animal drooled on it and moved it, which violates the principle of muktzah. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Let me check your comments and questions. Hinda Adder says, honey mead is the term you're referring to with regard to the wine and honey, I think. I was going to say mead, but isn't there something with mead that has milk in it too? That's why I didn't want to say it. I'm not sure. I didn't look it up before, so I'm not sure. But the rabbi said you could do this mixture that has honey and wine in it. I believe there's pepper in it as well in Talmudic times. That was okay because it didn't require vigorous shaking. But they were going to make sure that you prepared such a drink just for your immediate need and not with any kind of vigorous mixing. Not for later. Okay, question from Nina. We always make it right before eating. This is with regard to guacamole. So we always make it right before eating because it gets brown if we make it too early. And we like to have it on the Shabbos table because it's so good on challah. What to do? So I'm not sure. First of all, I'm not a rabbi. And just because of what we learned today, I have a question about guacamole. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more. I'm not saying it's prohibited to make guacamole during Shabbos, but I think we have to be careful about that. For sure, what's good about it is we're making it in order to eat it right then, not to eat it past Shabbos, or obviously not adding heat to it. The question is, does it somehow rise to the level of overdoing the food preparation? I'm not sure. Bill Eldridge says, that's interesting that they use the title Mar. It would seem to be then a style determined by the Persian overlords because I know that Christian bishops in the Persian sphere also use the title. So I think, it probably just means it's the local honorific in that part of the world. Cynthia Lenz, have you ever tasted asafoetida? I have not, and I believe it tastes terrible, right? And I think it might smell bad too. I knew that it was an important medicine, in the kind of ancient medical cornucopia, and even as late as the 1800s, it was still one of the important medicines. I have not tasted it, but I think apparently there's a way to make it so that it, in a very small quantity, it acts like a spice. But probably people are more familiar with using it as a medicine and a foul-tasting one at that. Hinda Adder says, but taking care of the body is not really accomplished by eating wheat bread instead of barley bread. or drinking wine rather than beer. I think you're probably right. I think the principle, though, stands. I think that was Rav Papa's point. And remember, when they're talking about foods in the ancient world, and as we saw, those big arguments about mustard, I think a lot of them happen because in different regions, they might take the same ingredients, but they work them in different ways, right? They'll prepare different foods that kind of sound the same, but aren't. And the procedures for making them and rendering them edible in one region are different than another. And that's what led to a lot of these disagreements among the sages, because they would have agreed if they were watching the same food being prepared in the same way in the same kitchen. They came to different conclusions, often because in those different regions, different kinds of work were being done and a different level of workmanship, craftsmanship, and effort were going into it. And finally, Sharon Frank Brooks says, honey wine is mead. It is the reason we call the post-marital time the honeymoon. Oh, that's so interesting. I did not know. Okay, my friends, that is what I've got for us today. It's been great to learn with you. Hopefully we learned a few bits of wisdom from Rav Chisda. Maybe not everything that he said applies to our lives, but I'm sure that some of it does. And may we merit to enjoy the advice he gave for when you're wealthy and not so much for when you're broke. But if we find ourselves broke, it's not a bad idea to refer to some of his tips from Rav Chisda here on page 140 of Tractate Shabbos. Wishing you all a very sweet Shabbos, and I look forward, God willing, to seeing you tomorrow night after Shabbos ends to continue